Tradition, tradition, tradition. For so many Muslims, traditionalism is at the core of their iman, whether they care to admit it or not. And no, I'm not talking about being Muslim as an identity rather than a belief system due to your culture. Wait, or am I? When I'm talking about traditionalism in this video, I'm mainly speaking about the way people view people of the past in a glorified way. Here's an example of the common sentiment.
But in Islam, we have a different measuring stick. What we do is we go back. The people who preceded us had more knowledge than us, had a better understanding of the deen than us.
The problem with this logic is that it's not how knowledge works. Knowledge and understanding doesn't get worse with time. This is how knowledge doesn't work, linearly going down, where people's understanding continues to get worse and worse as time progresses. Because if this were the case, then all of your favorite scholars, the Saudi gang, Abdul Wahhab, Ibn Taymiyyah, and Nawawi, basically any scholar you get your knowledge from, have to have, to some degree, a watered down understanding of the deen. Using the understanding from the Salafis' favorite hadith, knowledge after the Prophet's generation is by default weakened to some level. So what about Aqidah and Fiqh 1,000 years later? It doesn't matter if they return to the past, they by default have to have a watered down understanding, and you taking from them makes it even more watered down. In reality, knowledge isn't linear. Yeah, probably at first knowledge decreased due to the knowledge being spread out, but there comes a point where people can know better than a previous generation because they have more access to knowledge and information. And not just things like a hadith, but also commentary. So let me present a question to you, because I know that even when I solely mention scholars, your Salafi mind will automatically correlate scholars with Sahabas. So sure, I'll entertain this question. I'm sure you're asking, Noor, can we have a better understanding than the Salaf? Sure, why not? Whoa. Before you start putting me on a kill list, let me explain. The biggest hurdle you need to cross before understanding my response is this. Are the Sahabas, or any scholar for that matter, ma'asum in regards to anything? Why is it that the Sahabas were corrected constantly during the time of the Prophet, yet apparently after he died they no longer were ever incorrect with regards to anything? But no, they're from the best generation. How does being from the best mean you're flawless? Because that's what you're saying. You're saying the best of generation were perfect in knowledge and understanding. Who says best in this regard has to mean best in knowledge and understanding? Maybe they have the best in iman. The same thing goes for the Salafis' second favorite ayah. Allah being pleased with you doesn't mean because of your perfection. Who's to say it's not because of their iman and actions, which were incredibly noble and honorable? Also, Allah is pleased with us, Muslims as a whole. A big problem is that traditionalism is an issue generally, which is why the Quran talks about following the path of your forefathers in a bad light, because it's what we do, unfortunately. Take how people talk about scholars.
He says today a man will say that Ahmad was a man and I was a man. Yani I am a man. Ahmad is Hamza. But Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen says Ahmad and you are not the same.
So, is he superhuman? Is he not a man? What about other muhaddithin? What about people who have studied his works and works of others? This notion of glorifying people because they're from the past is wallahi so bizarre if you think about it. What's the difference between a scholar of today and a scholar of a few hundred years ago? Time. That's it. If anything, now I'm not saying it, but one could say scholars of today can potentially hold more weight than scholars of the past because they have more access to resources and a body of Muslim academics to learn and study from. The other day I was reading a paper refuting Al Albani's grading of a hadith, and no, it's not in my favor. What this really highlighted for me was this concept of refuting big-name scholars. Scholars of the present are constantly being refuted, and that's mostly the reason why people aren't calling scholars superhuman like they do with scholars of the past. Because it's in the present. We're living in a time where people refute them. But for whatever reason, access to refutations of scholars of the past are harder to find. Why is that? Do we really think that these scholars were so much on the haqq that everyone knew they were correct, therefore nobody could refute them? Scholars of the past were considered contemporary too. The takeaway is this. Let's stop glorifying academics of the past and belittling academics of the present. Time is not the indication of someone's correctness. The weightness of what someone presents does. Scholars could be right or wrong regardless if they're classical or contemporary. And with that said, Assalamu alaikum.